I had myself muted the whole time, of course. Thanks, Zach, for letting me know. I'm going to start from the top again. Okay, I'm actually recording this. I'm going to upload this as a separate video afterwards. Now. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to start recording again. I do this all the time. Anyway, is what it is. Hello, and yeah, welcome to take 2 for my May Q&A. I've just been rattling on for almost 20 minutes. I had my mic muted the whole time. Thankfully, one of my Patreon supporters jumped in online to, like, in the chat and mentioned that he couldn't hear me. So otherwise I would have gone right to the end, probably wouldn't even figured out until it had gone live and I'd gone to bed or something. Anyway, take 2. This is my Q&A for my Patreon supporters on this channel. This will be going out to the public a little bit after I live stream it, as I'm doing now. But the idea here is basically my Patreon supporters can ask me questions every month, and then I spend the time in these videos to basically answer them. So I'm gonna go back. I just finished my second of 3 questions. I'm gonna go back to the beginning and start with question 1, now that my mic is not muted. So the first question from my Patreon supporters was from JP, and it was the question is, any updates on Nord Saga? And in a nutshell, God, this feels so weird going over the whole thing again a second time. But in a nutshell, there isn't much progress on Nord Saga. I have been working on Nord Saga for I think since 2016 is when I started working on it, maybe 2017. But basically in the late summer of 2019, I had got it to a point where I play tested it at the UK Games Expo in the UK, in Birmingham, at 2 different tables, and yeah, it was quite good. People quite enjoyed it, but there was a lot of changes I wanted to make to it, and I basically, shortly after that, I worked on it a little bit more, and then I put it to one side. If you want to check that out, I actually have made my playtest notes for that public. There's a link in the show notes to go check that out. It's in OneNote, and it's basically what I used for my playtest. Beyond that, there are some changes. It has been, that was 2 years ago. That was 2019 when I was working on that, just a bit less than two years ago. I parked it just over a year ago, and I'm still not intending to pick it up again until after I finish working on Pitchfork. So Pitchfork is definitely my priority right now, and I'll be picking up Nord Saga sometime after that. However, if you really, really want to play Forbidden Lands with a Nordic feel, with basically Vikings with a Forbidden Land rule set, today there was a supplement that has just come out on the Drive-Thru RPG website. The link is in the show description. It's called Wolf and Raven, and it's basically allowing you to play historical Vikings with the Forbidden Lands rules. So that includes all the like raiding and alcohol drinking rules, stuff like that. It changes the stronghold to be a longship, etc. Now I was a little bit apprehensive when I saw that they had just landed. I got a little bit scared, like, oh no, I had this like niche area of an idea, which is to run something Nordic, very Nordic feeling, using the Forbidden Land rule set, and somebody's beat me to it because I've basically parked it. I've taken my time, worked on other projects, my own fault, of course. But I do feel like there's having just looked at the preview for Wolf and Raven, I definitely feel that there's space for both of them to kind of coexist. And that's because Nord Saga, just to give it a very quick pitch, is more like, it was very much influenced by Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So it has non-human kin in it, which Wolf and Raven doesn't. You can play the Aelfar, Dvergar, Jotnar, and Nissar, which are basically elves, dwarves, frost giants, and it's like a halfling gnome goblin mix, the Nissar. And they're all toned down, so they don't feel they all feel, for me, they feel quite original. The Aelfar, for example, are quite animalistic, quite quite animalistic. I guess I would say they're quite small as well, smaller than people. So they're a bit more like nature pixies, but also, I mean, they're, when I say small, I kind of mean like I don't know, like 1 meter 20 or something like that, 1 meter 30, something along those lines, maybe a little bit taller. Anyway, very much in touch with nature, quite beautiful in a kind of wild way, if that makes sense. The Dvergar are kind of a similar stature to them, but I've gone straight back to the kind of the roots of how the dwarves in sort of Nordic saga writing were kind of talked about. I tried to ignore what Tolkien had done with dwarves, because when we think of dwarves, we basically think of how Tolkien interpreted them. And I went right back to the kind of the stories of where the dwarves came from, and they were basically formed from like maggots from Ymir's, like, anyway, they're basically like this kind of grubbing, the idea is that they're kind of like grubbing into the earth to kind of dig into the earth and find, dig for things. Like they live in underground caverns where they are master smiths, and they're obsessed with ore and gems and minerals and that sort of thing. So I made the Dvergar and Nord Saga are basically quite stone-like. So if you think of the Thing from Marvel, from the Fantastic Four, but not orange, but rather like stony colored, that's the kind of idea behind the Dvergar. They're completely hairless rather than having long beards, and they have kind of like these fissures in their skin because they're kind of like stony skinned. So that's them. The Jotnar are only about a head and shoulders taller than the average human, so they are taller than humans, but they're not like massive giants. They're just big, and they're in our world. And something with our world is messing around with their DNA, or messing around with them somehow, so that they all have a mutation. There's a random mutation table which you roll for, and they're all kind of animalistic mutations as well. So they might have antlers. One arm might be like a tentacle. They could have a tail. They could be covered in fur. Those sorts of things. And I have a D66 table that you roll if you roll up a Jotnar to find out what your mutation is. And the Nissar are basically like halflings, but kind of gnomes, more like gnomes than halflings, but halfling-sized gnomes, if that makes sense. They're quite small, like a meter tall maybe. They have the conical hats that gnomes often have in popular paintings since the 1800s, really. So I've kind of tapped into this sort of this view of like house spirits and gnomes. And Nissar is like a house spirit, I think in Norwegian, possibly something like that. Anyway, I'm starting to blab a lot about Nord Saga. Those are the kin you can play alongside humans. You're playing in our own world. It's post Black Death, so it's very much similar to the Ravenlands of Forbidden Lands in that the world has just finished this apocalyptic event, and people are slowly starting to return to normality. There are ruins of villages and castles and all that kind of stuff. But instead of there being this blood mist like there is in Forbidden Lands, it's the Black Death Plague. On top of that, I'm tapping into some of the Wolfrup themes. Chaos is kind of a thing, and I'm looking at Ragnarok, which is the end of the world, where the Aesir and the Vanir, who are the kind of the Norse gods, will be fighting against basically Loki and his children and the fire giants from Muspelheim. So the idea is that Muspelheim is creeping into our world. Like there's this like influence, this influence from Muspelheim, which is slowly like corrupting our world a little bit, getting it ready for Ragnarok. So you have this taint of chaos parallel, right? With people, there'll be cults who are kind of like trying to bring about Ragnarok, who believe that they're going to be the last survivors, that sort of thing. Anyway, so that's Nord Saga, and it's also based in the UK. It's based in Yorkshire, or Jorvik, as the Norse called it. and alternate history in taking the assumption that all these fantasy races exist because one of the Vikings of legend, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, who is one of Ragnar Lodbrok's sons, was given the help of the Aesir to fight back against Christianity, the Christian kings at the time. And the way they helped them is that the Aesir helped them was that they allowed him to travel to these different worlds within the 9 worlds and recruit help from the races I've just mentioned to come back to our world, Midgard, to fight for the Norse and to overthrow the Christian kings in basically England and continental Europe. So the idea is that we move forward like 200 years, and it's the I guess early or maybe the beginning of the High Middle Ages kind of timeline, but instead of there being this like Christian the Holy Roman Empire, it's just replaced with a kind of Nordic empire. So it's just kind of like Viking themed medieval fantasy in our own world, so you can kind of use all of the normal names and stuff, but also with a lot of fantasy elements using the Forbidden Lands engine. I'll stop talking about it. The only thing I want to say about it was with progress. You can read all this in the OneNote notebook that I've kind of linked in the description. But the idea is that I will be changing some of this at some point. I already have some ideas because it's been percolating for 2-ish years since I stopped working on it. Some of the mechanics are probably going to change from what are listed there. Some of the setting is going to change from what's listed there. But more or less what's there is probably about 80%. I don't want to put a number on it, but most of that is going to make it into the final product, I think. So that's basically Nord Saga. I'll move on now. James Harrison asked, what house rules do you use for Free League games? And I'll end with Coriolis because I have quite a few house rules for Coriolis. I'll start with Mutant Year Zero. Mutant Year Zero, I allow some of the player characters to use role-specific skills. Not all of them, but for example, if you have GenLab Alpha, some of the roles in that are for things like a hunter, a healer, and the hunt and heal skills are only usable by those roles. Now, that feels a little bit restrictive. I'm not a big fan of that because some of them, like Jury Rig, I'm happy for that to just be very specific to the gearhead. I'm happy for Find the Path to be specific to the stalker. But like Intimidate for the Enforcer feels like anybody could try and intimidate somebody. So I will allow PCs to use some of those specific skills. It's just that they won't be allowed to put any points in them because they don't have any skill levels. It's just going to be based on their base attribute level. And obviously they can't pick up any of the talents that go with them or anything like that either. Unless they take that one specific talent, I can't remember what it's called, that allows you to take a role-specific talent. But anyway, that's the only Mutant Year Zero house rule that I can think of off the top of my head. I did write some rules, quite detailed rules for overhauling armor, and they are, I think, in the Discord server for the Year Zero Worlds. In that server, I might have put them in the Free League forums as well. If anybody's interested, drop a note in the comments and I can dig them up. But they were quite detailed armor rules to basically introduce things like weight. So the higher your armor rating, this is post-apocalyptic mutants, right? So the idea is that the scrap armor you're wearing, you can get a really good roll on your from a gearhead to build this scrap armor. But the idea is that the greater the armor rating, the heavier it's going to be, because you're basically like just layering shit around you. It's just like scrap and just rubbish that is being kind of weaved together to do that sort of thing. So the rule was kind of like the higher your armor rating, the slower and noisier you would be. So it's kind of like those are the tradebacks of being basically a tank. Whereas the lighter ones are kind of like you don't have those penalties. You can still be quiet, but the more you put on, and I kind of had it in 3 tiers, where I had like light armor, medium armor, heavy armor, those sort of parallels. And with certain, taking the armor ratings into bands to say, like, if you have an armor rating of within these numbers, then it would be considered light armor, medium armor, or heavy armor. And that was it in a nutshell. I never actually got to play test those. I never got to use them in a game, but if I ever was to run Mutant Year Zero with armor, I would probably maybe do something similar again. I don't know. That's the only other one I've ever thought of and kind of fleshed out as well. Forbidden Lands, the only one really that I would do again, which I am doing in my current solo campaign, which has just started, is no pushing on a test which takes a quarter day or longer. Simple one, and I feel that's in keeping with the rules. The rules say that you can't push passive rolls, and I kind of feel like a roll that's representing an action that's taking an entire quarter day is quite passive. The idea that you hurt yourself and that you gain willpower means that you've pushed yourself to the limit so that you're stressing your body. And if it's taking you, 6 hours to do something, I don't really think that kind of fits necessarily. So I take that out. I don't allow that in my games. Alien. Only one house rule. I've suggested it in our current Alien campaign, and Ed, the GM, agreed to it, and that is basically that player characters get 1 career talent and 1 general talent at character creation. The rules state you only get 1 talent when you start the game. We've made it so that it's 2. And it doesn't actually give you much more survivability. For my character, I actually took, I think it's called Tough, I believe, or maybe Grit or something like that. It gives me a little bit more, I think it gives me +2 health, so it does make me more, makes me more tough. But at the same time, it's not the health that's going to kill you in that game, it's the panic. And I don't feel like that really gets... You can get some talents which can kind of help with that, but I feel like all of us are pretty squishy, despite this 1 extra talent. And the reason I suggested that and why I think it's a good idea, and I would do it again for a campaign, is that if you look at games like Forbidden Lands, which is also quite a harsh game with quite a harsh death spiral, that allows you to have two talents when you're starting the game. And it also suggests 1 profession talent and 1 general talent, and that's basically what I've suggested here for Alien. Otherwise, we're running Alien, and I would run Alien by the book. Last but not least, Coriolis. There's quite a few here. I'll just rattle through them. If you look at the... I've run a Coriolis campaign for the Mud and Blood podcast. If you look in the description below, you'll see some notes for my Coriolis campaign, and it's I believe an Excel workbook, and the first tab in that has a list of the house rules. So I'm just going to rattle through them very quickly. The first one is that for initiative, I was having roll a d6 and add your agility to it. Pretty simple. Second one is that when you are assigning roles in a ship for ship combat, you can have the captain role work alongside another role without any penalty. And that's basically because the captain's role is just telling other people, or is basically saying what they want to happen. Like, you're giving orders. So I don't have any issues with someone sat in being the pilot, flying the ship, and giving orders for what's to do next, for what should be done next, or to be the engineer and to give orders and basically be the captain. So the captain can be an engineer, it can be a pilot, can be a gunner, etc. And I don't have any issues with that. And the main reason I came up with that house rule was because the campaign that I ran only had 3 players, and there are, I believe, 5 ship roles in total, maybe 4, but I think 5 in total. And that means with 3 players, you're kind of really stuffed with what you can do with it. Rules as written. So we did have the ship have an AI, which would allow the ship to take on one of those roles, but then there was still one missing, and I kind of did a bit of brainstorming about it and thought, actually, why can't the captain be somebody else? And we did use it. We did use it in playtesting, and it worked just fine. So I think that's a very subtle house rule that doesn't really break anything. Another one is ship problems. Your ship has a problem. My ship, the ship in my campaign, had 2 problems actually, And in the book, it basically says you have to spend 1 or more darkness points to have that ship problem come to pass. And I didn't want that, so I basically said if I want the because I wanted the ship problem to be kind of quite central to the theme, and it was quite subtle as well, so it wasn't really like messing with the players necessarily, and therefore I just thought I want to be able to use that ship problem whenever I can, and I wanted there to be an air of mystery about it. And if I was spending the darkness point, then it was kind of making it feel too mechanical, and I wanted it to stay quite narrative. So I basically said I'm going to be making the ship problems happen whenever I need to in the narrative, and I won't be spending darkness points for it. Some small tweaks around advancement. So if a player wanted to increase a skill, I think it might have been if you wanted to take a new skill, you had to have used the skill previously, and that's actually a rule that's come up in some of the newer Free League games now. So I feel like that when I ran the Coriolis campaign 2+ years ago, that wasn't really in, I don't think, any of the other games. I think Forbidden Lands might have had something similar, although it was in beta phase at the time, I believe. Anyway, it's kind of standard Year Zero engine practice now, and so I feel like that probably, if Coriolis was being rewritten for a second edition, that probably would make it in anyway. That you need to use a skill the first time to successfully to be able to advance it, to take a point in it. And similar to that as well with talents, if you want to take a talent, you have to provide a good narrative reason for why you want to take that talent. It's obvious for some of them, like if you want to get a cybernetic implant or you want to get biosculpted, they cost money, you have to get somebody to do them, so that's kind of taken care of. It's like you go shopping and you get a new cybernetic arm, or you get biosculpted to be extra beautiful or whatever. But for some of the other talents, why would you all of a sudden just be tough, like tougher? Or why would you all of a sudden be, a crack shot with a gun if you've never used a gun in the, in the previous session? So I just kind of said, if you want to have, there needs to be some sort of narrative reason for why that talent makes sense for your character that you're taking it. Yeah, pretty straightforward. And the last one there is the stun. It's to do with stun weapons. Stun weapons rules as written in Coriolis just reduce your stress, and that felt a little bit off to me. If you were to get hit with effectively a sci-fi taser, you're not just going to be stressed and that's it. You're going to be also, partially paralyzed for a time, because that's what they do. They basically make you, seize up. So my house rule was basically, if you get hit with a stun weapon, then you are left, and there's at least 1 damage that is inflicted. So basically it's like a successful shot. Not only do you take the stress damage, but you also lose your next turn. I think my intention for it might have been you only ever take 1 stress damage from it, but you take and then you take 1, you lose your next turn. And then I think I had it where, if you had extra successes, then the GM can decide whether that would go towards extra damage or it could go to extra turns where you were immobile. They never came up in play because we never really used stun weapons in our campaign, and I'm not sure how I feel about them now. I do feel like stun weapons need a bit of work anyway, so that they do something like that, but there's an issue with player agency, and if you have players who in combat can't do anything, it takes away their agency, which is not really a good thing. It's not something you really want to happen. So I'm not sure that is necessarily the best approach, and maybe there's some other options around that, how maybe that can be sort of handled. Anyway, those are my house rules. I don't have any house rules for Tales from the Loop because I never ran Tales from the Loop. I have written Year Zero Mini, which is effectively a completely house ruled Tales from the Loop. So you could look at Year Zero Mini as a sort of house ruled version of that. But I've never run I've played Tales from the Loop. I've never run it, so I've not actually got any house rules. Likewise with Vaesen, I've played on this channel. Actually, I've played a campaign of Vaesen, but I've not run it myself. And yeah, that's it. I've covered the other ones, the other games. Twilight 2000, we're not doing any... We haven't come up with any... Ooh, we might have a house rule for Twilight 2000, actually. Yes, we do. There's one. For NPCs in the final version of the rules, they have a coolness under fire rating, but they don't have a morale rating. And the house rule will be if the NPCs are professional soldiers, then they will also get a unit morale rating, or unit morale die to roll alongside their coolness under fire. Because that kind of makes sense for professional soldiers to have morale, to have unit morale in a combat situation. So that will be a house rule that that we'll be using. Well, I haven't actually spoken to Tony because I'm not GMing it. It's a co-op 2-player game. So I need to talk to Tony about it. But it makes sense to me. It's something I would recommend. Whether we end up using it or not is by the by. It's a house rule I would generally recommend for Twilight 2000. There might be more for Twilight 2000. I'm still reading through the rules, the final version of the rules, and we're gonna be playing it this coming Sunday, so in 6 days. And I'm kind of taking my time with that read through. I really want to kind of try and understand the rules fairly well. So there may be some more house rules falling out of this read through that I don't currently know about. And that's it for house rules. And last but not least, Zach Burr, who's in the chat right now, has asked the last question for this Q&A. And that question is, how do you determine the minimal amount of bolt-on genre rules necessary for a specific application of a generic toolset, like Year Zero Mini? Can you talk through the process for Electric Dream, where you added stats? Yeah. So first of all, links. If you look in the links, the description here, I've linked two games that use the Year Zero Mini. One is Electric Dream, or Elect Dream as it's called, and the other one is Space Rebels. Space Rebels actually is there's a playtest document. It's very, very light. Like, the second half of it is just notes on what the playtest document is going to look like later. So you kind of need to be fairly familiar with Year Zero Mini and the Year Zero engine to be able to make full sense out of it. But the character creation stuff is all there. The character sheet is done, etc. And I have actually played it a little bit myself. But anyway, a link to the playtest document is in the show notes, and a link to the pre-gens for Electric Dream are also in the show notes. I haven't got a playtest document for that ready, so I haven't shared that, but you can get a good feel for it just by looking at the character sheet. In fact, I'm going to open the character sheet now, so I'm looking at it while I'm talking about it. So Zach hits on a point of like the minimum. It's like MVP, right? The minimal viable product, or whatever exactly that acronym is. But the idea being, what's the minimum amount of change to still have something that feels right? So without overhauling the entire generic rule set, how do you get to that point where you feel like it's the right level? And for me, Year Zero Mini, I kind of want to, maybe the next big addition, the next big change I make with it, put a little bit of guidance around here and talk around not being afraid to very, very much change what's there. If you look at Electric Dream, if you look at the character sheet for that, you're going to notice a number of things that are different from core Year Zero Mini. For example, I've added an additional appearance trait. So you have your meat self and your persona. That's important because of the setting. The setting is all about augmented reality. It's like central to everything. Everyone's chipped in the back of their neck with a microchip that allows them to access the internet and also access augmented reality as if everything was in front of you, like you're wearing Google glasses, but basically it's in your brain. And therefore, people can have this digital persona of themselves, which is like an avatar that people see instead of your meat self. So meat self is what you actually look like, and your persona is your digital persona, is what you're portraying yourself to look like. So you might change your appearance completely digitally, and obviously the more extreme you make it, or the more interesting you make it, the more it will cost you as well. So it being cyberpunky does mean that there's a lot of corporate influence here. So a lot of microtransactions and stuff like that. So I added that. I changed up the 3 luck point earners, which are Conviction, Impulse, and Friend in Year Zero Mini, and I removed Conviction completely, and instead I just went with a Quirk and a Chum. And the reason for that is I wanted luck points to be a little bit more scarce in this game. I wanted to be harder to earn them, and I really wanted to put the emphasis a bit more on players being misfits to an extent. And therefore I kept the Impulse, and I kind of rephrased it and reworded it as Quirk. So you have a Quirk, which is effectively like an Impulse, or like a problem, kind of. And I quite like that in playtesting as well. I've playtested this a few times, and it kind of felt right. You don't have as many luck points to kind of work with, but that kind of works. It means if you want to earn them, you have to use an Impulse, which is basically screwing some people over, or you have to help out your friend, or Chum it's called here. And you can definitely earn them. It's just a little bit harder to do. But the real big change here. Well, there's another one with debt. That's basically I've been inspired by how the debt mechanic works in Electric Bastion Land and basically pulled it in here. I don't really need to talk about that too much, I don't think, because it's not really making a huge change to the thing. The wealth system is still there. I've added a stash, which I kind of have added money back in to a certain extent, but it's still fairly narrative. But really, the main big change I made was I took the 4 attributes from Year Zero Mini and I added 2 in, so it's now 6. And I've mentioned this somewhere else as well recently. I actually think I might prefer this, generally speaking, for Year Zero Mini than the 4 that come from the standard Free League 4. That's because the Free League games come with a big list of skills, so you're able to differentiate your character quite a bit by having a different number of skills, but you could theoretically still have the same attribute spread as somebody else in a game. And when you take skills out, like you do in Year Zero Mini, and you only have the 4 attributes, you don't tend to get a lot of differentiation in the characters. Of course, your concept does bring you some differentiation, but I also felt in Electric Dream that it being kind of a more futuristic game, that I was doubling up on a lot of, when I came up with the original 4 attributes that I did actually playtest the first time, it felt like the recommended high attribute for certain player types were overlapping, and that was for the hacker and for this spy type of character. I can't remember what they're called. One of them's here. I've forgotten. It's not here. Not one of the 4 there. But there's like a sort of sneaky type, right? And they're kind of like both using the same. I think it was called Tricks. Yeah, Tricks. I think. I can't remember. I can't remember the original 4. But there was some overlap, and I didn't like that. I couldn't think of a way to kind of change it, so that there were still 4 attributes, but that they kind of like felt a little bit more differentiated between the different careers I was recommending, or concept elements of career. So then I started thinking about adding some attributes in, and instantly it just made sense. It was like, okay, you need to have an equal number of physical and mental attributes, because that relates to how the trauma works. So if I add 1 into each, that gives me 6 attributes. That's the minimum amount that I could do. And can I do it? Can I make 3 of each that kind of feels about right? And it was very, very quickly apparent that I could. They felt right. It kind of solved the issue of duplication, and that's what I ended up with. So in playtesting that, I've playtested that twice as well with the 6 attributes. It really worked very, very well, extremely well. So yeah, so well in fact that when I later came to do Space Rebels, which is a Star Wars hack that I made to play with my 5-year-old son, I was looking actually at West End Games Star Wars and looking at the attributes there. I was also looking at Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars and the attributes list there, and they both have 6 attributes. Or does West End Games have 8? Let me just have a quick check. I'm not sure my core rulebook is at the moment. I've got a source book, which, there we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it has 6. So at least first edition does, which is the one I run. 6 attributes. I'm pretty sure Final Flight of FFG's Edge of the Empire. I can't just leave it. I've got to check it. Also has 6, yeah. Yep. So to me, I was looking at existing Star Wars games. I wanted to try and make Space Rebels kind of compatible with the West End Games version, because I really like the West End Games version, and I wanted to be able to run some of the adventures from the West End Games Star Wars using Space Rebels, because it's also a D6 dice pool system. And I have actually run one of the solo, like, choose your own adventures from the D6 game using the character sheet for Space Rebels, and it works really, really well using the Year Zero engine. So I'm really excited about Space Rebels, and it's actually like almost perfectly compatible with West End Games Star Wars, but using the Year Zero engine. Anyway. Because they have six attributes, I kind of thought, well, I'm going to try this with 6 attributes. It worked really well for Electric Dream. And I didn't actually use exactly the same 6 that are in either of those 2 games, but I kind of like mixed them up a little bit, and I came up with a set of 6 attributes that felt really good. In fact, I think I've gone down to 5 attributes for Space Rebels. Let me just quickly check. Where is it? Again, if you check the show notes, I have linked the playtest for it, and I'm just gonna go there very quickly. Oh, that's interesting. I have a link to the character sheets and the cutout item sheets, but it's actually just a link to the the same thing, which is not good. Anyway, let me just jump down in the playtest to the attribute section. Okay, so I've actually reduced it down to 5. There's only 5 attributes in Space Rebels. I did have 6 originally because I was working with the 6, and then I've actually added skills. So this is something we're talking about, adding things to Year Zero Mini. This kind of stops becoming Year Zero Mini to a certain extent because I've added skills to the mix. So it's kind of like Year Zero Light, but it's also a lot of Year Zero Mini. It's really stripped back because it's for kids, basically. But I wanted to have the skills in there because I wanted this specifically to be compatible with West End Games. And thinking of looking at skill lists and how the skill lists would fit in with the attributes, it just kind of came together by having 5 rather than 6. So Space Rebels actually doesn't have 6; it has 5. And each of those 5 have 3 skills that go alongside it. So to come back to the original question, the original question was, walk through the process where I added the stats big, and I've kind of walked through that. I've realized I was waffling a little bit there, Zach. I'm not sure if that's if that kind of answers your question. But determining the minimal amount of bolt-on genre rules necessary is basically the way I look at it is, let's look at Year Zero Mini as a framework, right? What works and what doesn't work, more specifically. If something doesn't quite feel right, can I change the name of a trait? For example, in Electric Dream, I changed Impulse to Quirk, and I changed Friend to Chum. That's just like phrasing. It doesn't actually I'm not actually changing anything under the hood, so to speak. But then adding in things like, I really wanted debt to be a part of it. I wanted to have a stash be part of it, so I added those in. And then the stats increase in the attributes. That was a playtesting thing, right? I tried it out with 4 originally. Didn't like that it felt like it was too constrained, that there needed to be a little bit more of an expanse in terms of what you could do. And so I went with 6, because that needed to work with the trauma values. Space Rebels, by the way, does not use the same trauma. It uses different trauma. So they're not connected to the attributes as much. So yeah. So really it's really looking at the I guess if you're coming up with, or it's talking about a specific application of a tool set, you're going to be looking at a setting, right? And it's nailing what you want from that setting down, because Year Zero Mini is very, very generic, and you need to really nail the right points that you want for the specific setting. Not just the setting, but also whatever it is you're trying to do with the game. So Electric Dream, for example, isn't just a game about cyberpunk, a cyberpunk setting. It's also about debt, and it's also about trying to get out of the kind of what can I call it? You're all playing characters at like the bottom rung of, like at the bottom level of a tiered city, and the higher up you go, the better off you are. So you're trying to rise out from the depths, literally, and you need money to be able to do that. So money is a big part of Electric Dream, and I didn't want to just add cash in and ignore wealth, which I could have done. I wanted to keep wealth in there, but I also wanted to add a kind of a bolt-on mechanic for currency that worked in with debt, and that kind of works. I haven't play tested that a huge amount, but I'm kind of happy with the way I went with it, or how it's come out. And other than that, it's basically just what is needed, or what do I need to change to make the setting work. It's not a very good answer, I realize. But yeah, keep it as vanilla as you can, and then just change those things that really need changing. For example, the trauma hasn't changed at all. The concepts, the concept elements haven't really changed, I don't think. I did provide guidance for what the background element and the career element should be, but that's still keeping the concept more or less as it is. So yeah, I can't nail it down more than that. It feels a bit waffly, I'm aware, but that's what I've got. I've just seen Zach's written in the comments setting and theme. So I just mentioned setting, theme. Yeah, I mean, yeah, theme, tone, whatever you want to call it, is also a big part of it. So if you want something a bit more horrific, for example, or you want like characters to lose their minds or something like that, if you want to go into like the Cthulhu sort of gaming realm, you might want to expand the disorder mechanic that I've got currently, and have something a bit more involved, like a sanity track or something like that. I don't know. It just really depends on what you're trying to do. That's it. That's all I've got. My voice is starting to go. I haven't got water up here with me. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much to my Patreons for not only for your support, but for the questions. And I'll be back again next month for more. I just see Zach's just written something saying he was typing that as I was talking about renaming friend to chum. So yeah, that's like setting and theme. Yeah, so kind of tweaking elements. Evocative trappings. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Right. So thanks very much. I'm going to stop now because it's been over 40 minutes, which for 3 questions is quite a lot. And in fact, I have also done this. I've been up here for more than an hour working on this because I was muted for 20 minutes. So thanks very much for the questions, and I'll see you again roughly this time next month. Cheers.